Okay, so officially welcome from my side to everyone for another CMX Connect virtual lunch. Thank you all for being here. So for those that don't know me, my name is Hugo Paquin. I am the CMX chapter lead for Hamburg here in Germany, and I'm a community builder focused on founder communities, especially in the climate space. And if it's one of your first time attending one of these lunches, the concept is very simple. It's a 1 hour interactive discussion where we aim to bring together community builders, thought leaders, and we try to foster dynamic exchange, thought provoking conversations, and just create opportunities to learn from one another in a fun, casual, digital format. So, nothing more, nothing less. Today's discussion is titled Diving Deep into Community Led Playbooks. For this talk, I'm very happy to be joined by Gareth Wilson. Gareth is a community led growth consultant with over 15 years of experience in founding growth roles at various community based startups. So, from Glitch to CodeSandbox and another one you might know, Orbit. Gareth has spent hundreds of hours studying the community led strategies behind some of the fastest growing companies out there, which has led him this year to launch his own newsletter titled Community Inc., which dissects the inner workings of the community engine behind some of the world's most admired tech businesses. So, if you haven't read some of his deep dives, I highly recommend it. Cannot stress that enough. You can learn about the playbooks from the likes of Canva, Atlassian, Salesforce, Strava, Duolingo, and many others. So, thanks so much for joining us today, Gareth. Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, appreciate the invite, and yeah, kind of excited to be here and yeah, chat all things community.
Sounds good. I have a few questions lined up, but I want to repeat for the people in the audience, this is meant to be interactive. So please make use of the chat button and feel free as we go along to write your questions there. Might ask you to just ask it yourself. I think this will be a small, intimate setting. So we're all amongst friends. So don't be shy. I'm really excited and to jump right into it. But perhaps before we dive in, tell us a bit more about you, Garrett. So, where are you from? What's your background, and how did you end up in the community world?
Yeah. So yeah, based in London in the UK. I've mostly kind of worked in kind of startups in kind of growth kind of focused kind of roles. But I actually kind of started as a web developer, and so that was what actually kind of led me into community. So I was into kind of web design as a teenager, and there's a bit of a kind of like a breakthrough in the use of micromedia, kind of Flash and Director, with a site called Habbo Hotel. And so I kind of joined there, kind of check it out. It actually ended up being like a really kind of great way to meet some kind of prominent like web designers and stuff at the time, because it got a load of kind of press kind of coverage. And so yeah, I kind of found those on the site. Although it was kind of focused on just being a kind of place for kind of teenagers to kind of chat and hang out. And so over time, all those kind of the web designers kind of left, but I enjoyed the community. Yeah, I kind of stuck around. That site went on to kind of gather hundreds of millions of users across the world, and became kind of really interesting kind of community. And then I was on it kind of all the time. Became a volunteer kind of moderator there, and then eventually kind of got a job working for them. And that was kind of like my first insight into this kind of combination of kind of community and business, which I've been kind of fascinated with kind of ever since. And so yeah, that kind of led me into the kind of the community world. I think kind of most interesting in my experiences there is working for kind of Orbit, which is kind of like a community growth kind of platform. And so that gave me kind of exposure to kind of hundreds of different kind of communities and community programs. And so it was there that I started to kind of see these kind of like common kind of problems or kind of difficulties that kind of teams were having. And that's kind of was the kind of inspiration for me to kind of start the newsletter, kind of in particular, this disconnect between what community managers kind of do kind of day to day, and then kind of what like senior execs, C-suite expect kind of like out of community, with the kind of ROI kind of question kind of always kind of looming. And so the newsletter is an attempt to kind of document some kind of the fantastic examples of community kind of led kind of growth that exist. I found that while people often kind of can list off the names of some kind of really kind of great examples, kind of the Notions and Figmas and Salesforce and things like that, the kind of detail around how exactly they went about it and like why it was kind of so impactful often kind of gets kind of lost in the noise. And so the articles I write are an attempt to go really kind of deep and thorough. They typically kind of 5, 6, 7,000 words. Take 40 plus hours to kind of put together. Consider 40 or 50 kind of different kind of sources, and so they're meant to be kind of like an in-depth look at why a community kind of was successful, primarily through a kind of business kind of strategy lens.
Yeah, very cool. I think I'm gonna need some audio companion for your deep dives, so I can listen on the go. Some of them are very extensive, but that's a good thing. Definitely enjoying them. Maybe a classic question that I ask people when they come on is, where does community fit in an organization? Does a community team or department make sense? Does it report to, let's say, marketing, to product, to perhaps directly to the C-suite and management? So maybe from your experience and perhaps what you've researched, what's the optimal way to integrate a community in the org chart?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one for me. There's kind of like the ideal, and then there's kind of the reality. I think the ideal is that I think when you kind of set community up as either kind of like a replacement or an extension of marketing, that's kind of really kind of problematic kind of like positioning for community kind of internally. So essentially, like I guess the way that kind of community kind of delivers value differs from that of kind of departments like marketing and sales. So often the kind of the benefits derived for a business from community are like a second order effect of a thriving community. So they don't have this kind of like same like dollar in X dollars out type of model that kind of marketing and sales type of kind of approaches do. And so that's, I guess, the kind of the expectation, I think, of a lot of execs within the business is that, and with the positioning along those same lines, that they're kind of encouraged to kind of see this type kind of effect. And likewise, the kind of the way that community-led growth has been kind of sold kind of into businesses is often kind of through this kind of marketing type focused kind of lens, where people are saying like, oh, like channels like email aren't being as effective as much anymore. Kind of ads are getting more expensive. This kind of click fraud. Relationships are kind of increasingly kind of important, and so therefore you kind of need a community, and that's kind of definitely true. And I think it's going to become kind of more true in time. So with the rise of things like AI and LLMs, the kind of the quality of information you'll kind of get online will kind of like decrease, and it'll kind of stick to viewpoints which kind of break from the kind of status quo, because that's just kind of how those LLMs work. And so the importance of relationships kind of is still kind of true, but the way that kind of community works, given that it's kind of indirect, is problematic when you have this kind of direct kind of replacement kind of framing. Similarly, as an extension of a marketing strategy, that's also kind of problematic. I know from kind of my own kind of experience that the majority of things that you try in marketing kind of fail, as in they don't have a worthwhile kind of impact that you want to kind of double down and kind of keep kind of investing in them. And so that's kind of fine, and it's kind of an accepted part of kind of how marketing works. It's just you try a bunch of different kind of channels, a bunch of different kind of campaigns. Some of them will work, and when they do, that's where you double down and kind of focus. If community is kind of positioned as like yet another channel or thing to try, then it'll, they'll try, they perhaps won't see the results they want, and it'll kind of get closed down in the same kind of fashion. So I think community kind of within marketing is kind of problematic. I think the real kind of true value of community comes out in its kind of like total impact upon a business. So I see community as being like a cross-functional kind of force multiplier, something that can improve the outcomes of multiple kind of different functions. And so with that framing, I think it's more along the lines of like operations, in that it kind of lifts up kind of all departments, and I think that is kind of a better, more sustainable positioning for kind of community within a business. And then it kind of flows from there. Then that community should be its own kind of function. It should report into, say, CEO or COO, so that it's kind of programs don't become co-opted towards a particular kind of functions kind of objectives. But of course, there's that kind of like theoretical or the theory of kind of how it should be positioned, and then there's kind of the day-to-day reality. And oftentimes community managers aren't in a place to kind of dictate where they kind of end up in an organization. And so I think in reality, you kind of see it in all manner of kind of different places: marketing, kind of product, and kind of elsewhere. There's some interesting examples, I think, with, say, UiPath. So they have a team which is spread across both marketing and product. They have a couple of folks in product, a couple of folks in marketing. Waze have an interesting approach where they have folks kind of embedded within different functions within an organization. So there are certainly kind of examples of organizations kind of trying kind of different approaches. But for now, kind of most commonly in the kind of the deep dives specifically, then it's often kind of within marketing or within kind of product. I think are the kind of the main two there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I see. Maybe to bring some color and give some example based on your deep dives, like Joanna was asking, what are some examples of ways in which community building was used with great results as part of what you've researched? So do you have some examples from the ones you have that where how the community team is set up and what kind of traction that has provided?
Yeah. I mean, I guess a great example is with kind of Salesforce and the kind of Trailblazers community. So they kind of started in within marketing, but eventually kind of moved over into kind of under kind of product. Although their program kind of reaches across kind of multiple kind of different kind of functions. So they have kind of a really kind of rich, well thought through approach to getting feedback from kind of end users, but then also then kind of acting on that feedback and making sure that it kind of makes it into kind of the end product, right? Because there's no point kind of rallying kind of folks around kind of providing their feedback if you're not going to then actually kind of clearly kind of do something with it. That doesn't mean to say that you have to kind of like act on every kind of feature request that you get, but I think that the ideal is that you kind of respond to kind of each one and explain why you're not going to go ahead with that if that's kind of the case. And so Salesforce have put a kind of a ton of time and effort into incentivizing and structuring their kind of product management kind of processes around making sure that happens. And so they put the onus on the kind of the product managers internally to include a certain like amount of community submitted kind of suggestions into kind of each of their kind of sprints and kind of releases. It's also on them to kind of provide the kind of the follow-ups to why they aren't going to progress with something kind of if that's not the case. And they kind of do a good job of kind of following up with the folks then who have requested feature, let them know that that's kind of been kind of released as well. And so some of the the stats that around the kind of Salesforce example are kind of really impressive, both in terms of like faster kind of adoption rates, kind of reduce kind of churn. And so the deep dive kind of gets into the specifics there, but that's kind of one that really kind of comes to mind. Just in generally, in kind of another kind of successful approach, one that I just personally kind of found really inspiring was was the kind of Duolingo. So I didn't kind of realize this kind of before and then kind of researching, but the vast majority of kind of courses on the Duolingo platform, such language learning app, were created by kind of volunteers. Essentially over an 8-year period up to its kind of IPO, a group of say 1,000 kind of language experts and volunteers kind of came together to create the courses on the platform. And it was kind of a big undertaking, right? So we were talking like groups of say 5 or 6 kind of volunteers working 5+ hours a week over say a 3-month period to deliver one of these kind of courses. So it's kind of a big thing, but they, I guess, were able to kind of leverage the fact that kind of language is such an important thing, kind of for folks. Like it gets to some really kind of interesting kind of intrinsic kind of motivation around, say, purpose. So people want to kind of spread their language and encourage others to learn it. And so the Duolingo platform enabled them to do that and enabled them to kind of to create. And then also for those individuals, once you've kind of mastered the language, it's kind of like, what do you do next? And so helping others to learn and thinking through like what the best approach to that as well is another thing which kind of gets to kind of like mastery. And so there's some really kind of strong motivators there, which meant that people were kind of willing to kind of really kind of engage and spend a considerable amount of time and effort kind of helping kind of create these things. And it's also kind of hugely impactful for for their business. So if you think every time they supported a new language, then that's kind of like millions more people that they could reach and potentially kind of could utilize their application. So they were kind of increasing the kind of total addressable market for their kind of product with the launch of kind of each of these. And it also had the kind of knock-on effect of making their kind of marketing more efficient, because they're marketing the platform, not a language kind of specific kind of solution. And so the more languages that you kind of support, the more efficient that your kind of marketing is kind of overall. And so from a business perspective, it's kind of like hugely impactful for them. And so I think it's kind of, for me, it's kind of inspirational, because it's kind of to think about what challenges there are within your own business that you could kind of rally a group of folks around to kind of come and help. And so that was kind of a really great one, I think.
I mean, it's pretty insane actually to think of the business impact and the sort of value that this unlocks, considering that these are volunteers. And tell me if I'm wrong, but the incentives are really just to help others out, right? There's maybe some gamification, you get a badge, you're a teacher or something like that, but there's definitely, I don't think, paid incentives. And like you said, it opens up a whole new branch of their market. So it's really just, from a Duolingo perspective, they provide the platform and then they empower the super users to kind of go ahead and create their own content.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so there was some recognition there. So like if you go to the kind of course page, like if you had kind of assisted integration, then you'd see your name kind of up there. And they also kind of treated the course creators as like a community within the community. So they would run kind of specific events for them. They had their own kind of like Slack channel where they kind of communicate and things like that. And so they were kind of, I guess, incentivized through some of those things, but there weren't any kind of huge kind of financial kind of upside or those other kinds of kind of extrinsic kind of motivations for it.
And this open sourcing to the fans is a little similar, I think, with Atlassian, right? They also provided a very flexible SDK, so allowing people to code their own products. Basically, they're like, we can't develop everything for everyone, so we're just gonna open source it, be super almost transparent, and people will just build the products they want to see, and then of course you can capitalize on that later on. So
yeah, definitely. I think you see kind of flexibility as a common characteristic of products where you have kind of successful communities on the back of them. So yeah, Atlassian's kind of one. Salesforce is another. Kind of Notion is another. I think wherever you kind of see, I guess the inability to kind of like document kind of all of the kind of the use cases, or for like support staff to be able to kind of provide kind of clear, kind of obvious instruction, then community becomes kind of a real key unique advantage in providing support around the platform. Because what you really need for those hugely flexible solutions are kind of access to experts. Solutions aren't kind of like a like a yes no kind of tick box type thing. It becomes like a judgment call. And so you need folks who have experience of lots of different kind of setups, lots of different kind of rich kind of edge cases and use cases to be able to go to advise. And so in that setup, community provides kind of a huge benefit in its ability to provide you with kind of like 24/7 access to a network of experts who can provide you with kind of like personalized help, as opposed to kind of having to figure out the differences between what you're being told by support or in documentation and that kind of thing.
yeah. No, super interesting. I want to maybe zoom out a little bit because you mentioned that you started joining online communities in the early 2000s, and then you've seen both sides of the table, right? You were also on the side of community platforms, building community tools. So I'm really curious about your views on the state of the industry as it is today. And I want to read you actually a quote from one of your recent LinkedIn posts, which read like as such: "Community is in the throw of disillusionment." Big words. Sorry. "The hype sparked during COVID is gone, brought down to reality by the financial shift in tech and the layoffs that have impacted many. Many community managers are left looking for work, and founders of community software tell me it's extra tough to get investment." And then you went on to trace a parallel between the sort of hype around the community buzzword, as well a parallel with the growth hacking, which was a big thing in marketing, let's say like five years ago. So maybe can you explain for you where you see this leading and where we stand in sort of the hype cycle of community?
Yeah. So on the one hand, I think it's kind of slightly ridiculous to be talking about like the hype around community when it's existed for millennia, or even within a kind of like commercial context. Like there are examples going back 40 plus years. So Autodesk were running user groups in the 80s. Harley Davidson kind of pioneered like kind of its kind of like membership in the 80s too, and kind of Apple with its kind of homebrew kind of computing clubs and stuff. But I think off the back of the pandemic, certainly that's when we saw a huge kind of investment into the kind of the community space. So the increasingly investment into kind of community-led kind of programs, the emergence of community-specific kind of tooling, things like chief community officers start to appear and that kind of stuff. The interesting thing with the hype cycle is that that hype like never kind of lasts. Like it always comes kind of back to reality, as it were. The thing that I think has been kind of especially harsh for community is that the hype was kind of like extra because of the pandemic, and then we kind of got brought back down kind of extra hard because of the kind of changing kind of financial kind of outlook, which has made it much more of a tough environment for to kind of everyone you mentioned in that quote, from kind of community managers to vendors around the tools to the investors in the area and that kind of stuff. With that said, I'm still kind of hopeful and kind of enthusiastic about the space, because kind of to some extent like this is the kind of expected path, right? So we're in the kind of the trough of disillusionment now. What happens there is kind of this recognition of some of the issues identified during kind of the hype phase, and then kind of the real work to resolve those kind of begins, and then so you can kind of move forward and develop into a more kind of sustainable kind of path. And I think things like kind of the ROI issue, a lot of folks have been kind of like sidestepping this or ignoring it, and we now have to kind of do now that the hard work to kind of come up to work out like how we can kind of take that forward, because it's kind of really if you can kind of like solve that, then you can make it a much more kind of viable option for businesses to kind of invest in kind of long term.
And do you see that was a question from Johanna, but like, do you see a little bit of community fatigue post-pandemic, especially? So people went online, joined all these groups. Do you feel like this is now sort of coming back down to earth, and people have just gotten, in too many Slack channels, and now there's a little bit of a lull?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of definitely the case. There are lots of communities which kind of spun up, which like had big visions but kind of little kind of follow through. People didn't necessarily kind of see the benefits that they were kind of hoping for. I think we've now kind of started to see that people are kind of shying away from using the kind of the term community associated with some of its kind of businesses. Certainly, a lot of kind of the vendors of kind of like community kind of platforms are now beginning to kind of explore kind of other terms. So you see kind of go to network or kind of near bound or kind of user led and these types of things, where they're kind of deliberately avoiding kind of some of the associations with kind of community there. Long term, I think the path is to still kind of to own the term community, but just make it kind of synonymous with good business, as opposed to trying to kind of find other kind of terms to kind of to load up with it. But yeah, definitely kind of seeing community fatigue happening.
Yeah, that's what I think that's the kind of bottom line, right? It depends what you mean by community, and this is so context dependent. And you're right, I think the word has been co-opted a lot, and that's part of any buzzwords, right? Like it starts being plastered everywhere, and then it loses meaning almost. Like I don't know, in my world it was innovation, right? Like, what do you mean we're an innovation focused company? Well, you got to define it, and it's all about execution. So I think that's what's happening with communities. Like when somebody says they believe on the community based approach, it's like, please expand on that. Question from Martise in the chat: what are some of the best practices for user groups or chapter programs, and how are you articulating ROI to the business for those?
Yeah, I think the kind of the ROI kind of questions are an interesting one, right? So because I think there's kind of multiple kind of different aspects with what kind of folks are struggling with. So one, I think there's kind of a general lack of understanding between within a business of what that ROI kind of should look like and how it will kind of be formed. And so part of the reason why I started the newsletter was to kind of like to tackle that. But then there is kind of like an ongoing kind of education piece. I think the kind of the like the structure and like positioning I mentioned before of kind of community within a business kind of like kind of applies to that too. I also kind of see, I guess, this kind of like over reliance or over focus on kind of community kind of health or kind of like engagement kind of tactics. My concern there being that you can kind of create a thriving community in terms of engagement, but you're not necessarily delivering kind of business impact, and so your program can still kind of get kind of closed if you're not kind of making sure that those programs kind of like directly kind of tie back to kind of particular kind of business kind of outcomes. And I think there's kind of like three components that I see of successful kind of programs, and this kind of includes kind of user groups and kind of chapter programs too, is that the first two are kind of given. So one, you obviously have to kind of create value for members, otherwise kind of they won't kind of come back. The second one is that it has to create value for the business, or otherwise kind of you don't kind of get that kind of continued investment. But the third one, which I think a lot of people kind of miss, is that they don't necessarily kind of consider the unique advantage the community provides for them versus kind of the alternatives. So as mentioned, like if you want to kind of drive, say, more leads, then fine, community can kind of help with that, but you're not going to kind of outmarket marketing. If you want to kind of drive more revenue, again, community can help, but you're not going to kind of outsell sales. And so I think you need to kind of consider exactly why you're kind of using community kind of in for a particular kind of scenario, on the benefit that it gives you over and above everything else. But if you kind of nail those kind of three kind of components, then I think you have the kind of the makings of a kind of successful, kind of sustainable kind of community program. And to put, I guess, those in terms of kind of some examples. So like the early kind of Salesforce community was focused on support specifically. Their kind of the unique community advantage is that it was better than the alternative solutions like documentation and support staff, which can be slow to kind of create, expensive to kind of to maintain, and can't cover all the kind of use cases, whereas kind of community kind of could. The value then for members is that they get a better kind of experience. You're not going through the kind of the rounds of kind of support with some kind of support staff, kind of getting closer to actually kind of understanding what your question is really about, and what an actual genuinely kind of helpful kind of response. It's available kind of often kind of 24/7, with the kind of the forum structure that they have, and so that's better. And then the value that the business derives for them is that it's a kind of a scalable solution to this kind of problem. So at the time, Salesforce was kind of one of the fastest kind of growing businesses kind of in the world. They were kind of struggling to kind of keep up with the demand there, and so the community kind of acted as a kind of a scalable solution. And the interesting thing there is that these conditions kind of still are true today. And so I think why the Trailblazers kind of community continues to go from strength to strength is that these kind of fundamentals, these kind of three elements, is kind of still kind of in place. So sure, they're kind of not better able to kind of cope with the demand around the platform, but their product has only gotten more flexible, more complex, and so the need for kind of access to experts is still kind of just as kind of true today as it was 15 years ago when they started. Compare that to, say, the Duolingo example of community, which I gave. They only ran that program for kind of 8 years, and then it got closed. And so if you consider those kind of three elements again, the value to the members was kind of purpose and mastery, so the ability kind of to kind of create platforms that kind of take that box. It delivered huge value in terms of increasing the total addressable market, and enabling them to kind of parallelize kind of the course creation, so they're able to kind of get those courses to market kind of faster. They themselves only had, say, 40 or so members of staff at the time, so it wouldn't have been able to kind of do that kind of internally. So it kind of enabled them to do that much kind of quicker. And then the unique kind of advantages is that you're able to kind of create those courses kind of in parallel and access this kind of network of experts, which they didn't kind of have the resource to kind of access kind of internally. But those conditions kind of like don't persist kind of into the future. So the business value kind of reduces over time. So although there are kind of thousands of languages they could potentially kind of create kind of courses for, the vast majority of folks they're selling to actually only use kind of a relatively limited number of languages, right? There's a kind of few kind of the big ones, and then kind of the incremental value of adding, like the 91st, the 92nd, the 93rd, third course is relatively kind of small. And then similarly, kind of the unique community advantage diminished as well, because Duolingo became a successful company. They started making hundreds of millions of dollars. The staff kind of grew, and so their ability to kind of take course creation kind of internally kind of increased. And so these fundamental kind of conditions didn't kind of adapt over time. And so that's why, despite their community being hugely successful and having a massive kind of business impact and have been thriving and engaging, they still ended up kind of closing down their program just because it just didn't deliver that kind of unique value any longer.
That's so interesting. You think that's a specific feature of Duolingo itself, basically, that it's because of their business and what they were selling that it kind of ran its course, or is there a lesson there for other businesses who might basically have unlocked all the value of community, and then it's time to close the team down?
Yeah, I mean, so there were other aspects to their community. So they did do like in-person events, which kind of helped them with, it helped kind of people because they were able to kind of practice their languages, the languages they were learning kind of, face to face with kind of other people kind of learning too. It solved a kind of a problem for them of reducing churn, because essentially, like, once you've completed the course, what do you do next? Like, most people don't just kind of go, oh, I'll learn another language. Most people, learn a language for a kind of specific kind of reason, and so you don't necessarily kind of need to keep using Duolingo once you've kind of learned that language. And so the in-person events provided kind of an outlet for that. But I think the value to the business of that was relatively small, in that although they had kind of hundreds of kind of events kind of each month, and so we're talking like tens of thousands of people were coming along to these things, relative to their user base, which spread into the kind of hundreds of millions of people. It wasn't going to make kind of a huge kind of difference to their outcomes. They also had kind of 1 million plus folks on their kind of forum, so folks who were kind of wanting to kind of learn languages and kind of understand kind of the nuance of them, and go beyond kind of what their app kind of covered. And so it would have been interesting to see whether there were other directions they could have taken kind of those. Again, keeping these kind of, there's kind of like 3 core components of a successful community kind of in mind. So I don't think it's an inevitability that they had to kind of close down the programs. There were potentially kind of other directions they could have taken them, but they kind of chose kind of not to in that case. And to some extent, I wonder if that is something that we just, I guess, as a group, have to get kind of more willing to accept, is that like community doesn't necessarily always have to be like a function and continue to develop for the long term. Perhaps it is kind of just fine for it to have a particular kind of goal, particular kind of purpose on which you've achieved that. You don't need to continue it. There's interesting ramifications then to the business of like, how do you then close that down in a way where you don't kind of trash the brand value that you've created with that kind of community kind of over time. But we don't necessarily kind of have to see it as a failure of community if a solution kind of only has kind of a limited shelf life, because in that case, kind of the business value of their community is undeniable, even though it kind of didn't persist kind of longer term.
Yeah, no, interesting to see what on the community department closing down. I'd be interesting to see what happens in other cases. But to touch on Duolingo, maybe on the lighter side, one thing I find interesting, I think you as well, is the kind of cultural markers, that emerge sometimes from community, or let's say sometimes the memes, or just in the Duolingo case, it's the riff on the owl, kind of threatening you if you don't do your lessons, beg for your life in Spanish. I wonder, have you seen other such ways in where the members, kind of rally around these folkloric almost ideas, and then the community then co-opting that and using it as part of their own marketing?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's kind of, I know one of the kind of really kind of fun aspects of communities when people start to develop their own kind of language and in jokes and those kind of things. A really kind of fun one which I appreciated. I did released the deep dive on Strava kind of last week. There's created within their community is kind of GPS art or Strava art. So essentially, because when you kind of go running or cycling, Strava will kind of track you on a map. People then got created with the routes that they go on in order to kind of create pieces of art with their tracking data. And so they'll start tracking for a little bit, and then they'll stop and then go elsewhere. And so they end up with kind of pretty elaborate kind of creations. So we're talking like, snowmen, like the size of, over London, or kind of lots of kind of different kind of characters and things like that. Obviously, people are kind of doing things like like the Nike swoosh or like the Strava logo and things like that, and it's kind of getting creative and using that as a kind of a form of kind of expression. So yeah, I kind of like that one. And then within their own kind of group, the kind of like Strava or it didn't happen, kind of like kind of phrase kind of emerges, like unless you're kind of logging your workout on the platform, no one kind of quite believes any of the kind of the stories that you have to tell. And so yeah, there are kind of some interesting kind of examples of that, which I think kind of emerge from kind of communities. And then in like that Strava example, that ended up being much like with Duolingo, that they ended up kind of getting a bunch of kind of press around some of their kind of viral memes and things like that. The same happened with the Strava art, so they got picked up by international press. So both kind of in the US and sort of examples in Britain too. And so it gets them additional kind of exposure when it kind of breaks out of their own kind of community and becomes something that kind of other folks can kind of like kind of peer into and becomes kind of an interesting kind of story for other folks too.
No, that's really cool. I think it makes it easier as well when you have an amazing product and hundreds of millions of users. Then the ideas just they kind of come to you at some point. Question from Marty's. Outside of Salesforce, who else would you say are good benchmarks for chapter or user groups programs?
Yeah, so that as a kind of a tactic is a pretty kind of common go-to. So yeah, beyond Salesforce, Atlassian kind of do kind of a great job at that. HashiCorp, they have a kind of a pretty extensive kind of meetup kind of program kind of too. I'm currently kind of doing a deep dive into Notion. Notion have a kind of an interesting approach to user programs as well. In their case, they like the examples of like Salesforce and Atlassian. They're not centrally kind of controlled. Like everyone kind of runs their own thing on their own platforms, and there isn't that same inclusion. But yeah, I think those are kind of the go-tos from the examples I've written about kind of so far. So Salesforce, Atlassian, HashiCorp, and then when I publish it, probably in a couple of weeks' time, Notion's a good one too.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Would you say any company can be community-led? So without regards to whether it's for marketing, for customer support, for product, but would you say any company can or should adopt a community model with their users or audience and whatnot?
I think certainly kind of, any company can. I don't think the vast majority of them will be successful though. For kind of a number of reasons. I think one, back to the kind of the community advantage point, like does community provide kind of a unique advantageous kind of solution versus kind of the other things? I think in most cases they're probably, depending on what it is that you're hoping to achieve with community, there are probably more kind of direct, kind of quicker solutions to try. And you should probably exhaust those before really kind of trying kind of community. But then secondly, I think most organizations, just the corporate culture, perhaps, you know, like the founders kind of working styles just aren't set up to really support community. It's not something that you have to be accepting that it's kind of a long-term strategy. Like, it takes a while to both kind of form and then to then start kind of like deriving the value back to the business kind of from that. And because it's kind of this indirect model, you also have to be accepting that you will need to kind of invest kind of a lot of kind of resource up front for kind of this long kind of term game. Certainly in my own prior experience, like I worked in a number of kind of different startups, different kind of styles, and some of them, you know, I would not kind of tell the founders this, but like I would deliberately kind of shy away from using a community solution, because it's like there's just no way that this kind of person is ever gonna work well with a kind of community kind of led approach. They'd be the type of, you know, kind of founder who, you know, would launch a community and then 2 weeks later they'll be saying, oh, so what's the ROI? Or would run an event and they'll be saying, oh, how many leads did we get? And I think that's, you know, not the right mindset. When you start to look at the, you know, some of the successful kind of communities that I've written about, getting that kind of founder buy-in is kind of an essential kind of component kind of to it. So I guess, you know, it's arguable the extent to which, say, like, you know, like Benioff was supportive of the Trailblazers kind of community. At least, you know, there's a lot of seen like hard-fought battles to kind of get more resource and things like that. And there's still a relatively small team relative to their business impact, you know, even now, even though they include pictures of, you know, community members in all of their kind of like investor decks and on their posters and things like that. But nevertheless, like, you know, I came across say like a press release for the idea exchange, where, you know, Benioff is kind of giving it a quote around it and kind of supporting it. So there was at least kind of some support there. There's far more championing and kind of like overt support in examples of, say, like, you know, Atlassian, at HashiCorp, where their founders are directly involving themselves like in the community. You know, the folks, the like Mitchell Hashimoto, who's kind of the co-founder at HashiCorp, up until kind of very recently, we're still kind of actively responding to people on kind of Hacker News and on, you know, Stack Overflow and on platforms and things like that. It's kind of something that you're always kind of actively involved in. So yeah, I think that's kind of a key point. So most businesses kind of probably shouldn't have a community because they either don't have the culture and kind of mindset to support it, or there just isn't the unique benefit there of community to deliver. I think specific to startups as well, like most startups, again, probably shouldn't invest in community. And there are a couple of kind of exceptions to that. The reason why I think they shouldn't is because, you know, when you've got this kind of like limited time frame and a limited resource, and you have to kind of like reach a particular kind of like goal in kind of in that time, you know, to kind of get follow-on investment, like it's tricky to kind of squeeze a community program and get the value out within such a with such kind of parameters. The exceptions to that, I think, are where either obviously kind of the business itself is a community, but then in the other two scenarios, I think, are where you're either building a category, or where you have a product which is kind of disruptive, kind of unique, where there is kind of an exponential relationship between your kind of knowledge of the product and the value that you derive from it. So in the first instance for kind of category creation, I think community is kind of really useful because you can start producing, say, content around a particular kind of topic, getting kind of buzz around people, start to understand, you know, a problem that you want to solve, how the feature might be different, and get, you know, kind of excited about that. But unless you have a community, you have nowhere to kind of drive that kind of input. And what you want, if the category doesn't already exist, there probably aren't these kind of go-to kind of watering holes for people to kind of together and start discussing more bringing their examples and nuance to those kind of discussions. So it's kind of helpful there. It's helpful then in the kind of the follow-on stages. So when you start to kind of move beyond the problem and get into the kind of solutions, so you start building a product. It's then great to have that community kind of on hand to kind of help shape the product to make sure it kind of really kind of solves that kind of initial problem that you're kind of rallying around. And then you see kind of more kind of other examples. So the watering hole, I think the Flip My Funnel community. So Terminus created this kind of vendor agnostic community around the account-based marketing. And so ABM as a category emerged in no small part because of the kind of Flip My Funnel kind of community. That was primarily a conference and a kind of daily podcast. And they would kind of discuss all the kind of the key ideas there. But that was kind of a useful way of kind of rallying it. Late stages, when you're actually kind of starting to kind of establish the community, you start to essentially want to put like substance behind it, make sure it's not just kind of marketing kind of buzzword, but this is like something that people can build their careers around. People, companies kind of invest in, they can hire talent with a particular kind of set of skills. And that's when you get into examples like Atlassian kind of University, Salesforce kind of Trailhead, UiPath have their kind of academy. That was kind of hugely transformative for the kind of RPA kind of category, robotic kind of process automation. And again, like once you have those big education kind of centers in place, you want to kind of capture the value and sustain it. And so community is kind of this natural kind of companion to that. Then on the second point, about these kind of like unique kind of flexible products. Here I'm talking about examples like Notion or Canva, where typically when you obviously when you use a product more, as your knowledge increases, you get more value out of it. But with these kind of flexible solutions, which you kind of almost don't know all of the potential kind of end use cases, which is definitely kind of the case with kind of like Canva and Notion. Then the more you learn, the more there is to kind of to potentially kind of use and get into developing different ways. That I think has a kind of a unique capability to drive kind of word of mouth interest, and creators kind of love to create content around those topics. And so I think those are kind of the couple of exceptions, I think, to that. But for most part, I think it's kind of a difficult value proposition for kind of startups, where anyone who has to kind of force an amount of return in a certain amount of time frame.
No, that's interesting. I think it was you who mentioned Notion, that they didn't really start it off with a community mindset. They were building this cool, flexible product, and then they stumbled upon this subreddit where hundreds of users were exchanging how they were using it, like almost like Roblox or Minecraft, just building their own thing, and then that has a lot of virality embedded in it.
Yeah. I mean, so I think Notion was kind of like an obvious example to do a deep dive around. I was a little reluctant to kind of do it at first because to some extent it's kind of like a frustrating example. Like very few organizations like release a product and then like stumble across thousands of users self-organizing into kind of their own companies, sharing examples and things like that. And so like as a like as an actionable takeaway for most people, it's kind of like, well, that's never going to happen. The interesting thing about Notion is the way that they then have responded to that, and I think kind of incorporated it within their business and their kind of go to market. I think is really kind of interesting. It gets into some of these kind of ideas around kind of community kind of everywhere, and decentralized kind of community structures. So I think it is an interesting examples, even if you don't accidentally stumble across a Facebook group with 30,000 people chatting about your product.
We're almost out of time. We have about 5 minutes left. One question from Johanna about your creative process, so to speak. So maybe we can finish on that. But what criteria do you use to decide what company to do a deep dive on? And maybe from my side, are there any favorites in there, or ones that really surprised you and that you didn't expect to find what you did?
Yeah. So criteria, a bit mixed. So like I want to make sure that I'm writing about examples across a variety of different kind of scenarios, not just say B2B, but also kind of B2C. Still primarily kind of focused on kind of product communities. But again, like say with the example of kind of Strava, slightly kind of like bending the definitions there. I'm also kind of looking, obviously, for where that community has a kind of a clear, demonstrable kind of impact on an organization. Oftentimes, I'm getting the information from available sources. So it means that organizations who kind of have IPO'd or have been around for a while, or have kind of team members who are kind of like kind of pretty active on talking on podcasts and things like that, means there's this available amount of information to dig into. I'm kind of really reluctant to kind of go directly to an organization and start asking them these questions, because then you get into this kind of, have to deal with kind of PR departments and kind of legal sign off and things like that, and it's just kind of slows it all down. So that's there's just those kind of pure operational, logistical kind of considerations kind of too. But also part of it is just kind of scratching my own itch, right? So anyone who I kind of find kind of to be an interesting example, I just want to kind of to write about. And so yeah, there's kind of tons of ones which I'm kind of really interested to kind of to get to. HubSpot, I think, have a kind of really interesting story. It'd be kind of a pretty extensive kind of example, so I'm excited to get to that one. I'm excited to kind of pick up on some of the kind of the early examples as well. So like I mentioned earlier, like Harley Davidson and Autodesk, who were doing community kind of back in the 80s. So I'm interested to kind of see their approach and how perhaps kind of those things have adapted over time. So they're kind of a few of the examples I'm kind of excited to get into next.
Awesome. Well, Gareth, I think time is up, so I want to thank you on behalf of everyone here for doing the work that you do. First and foremost, I think the body of work that you're building. I mean, I read the nuggets and I collect all of it, but you're the one doing the heavy lifting, and I think it's really important to highlight I think the importance of this for us all community builders. I think you're really making the field more legitimate by highlighting the business value, the ROI, answering the ROI question. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your time today, and availability, and sharing all of this with us. It was great. It was fun.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I can only do the work with you're all out there doing fantastic, great work, delivering kind of value back to businesses, creating kind of thriving communities. And so I think it's been really, really kind of exciting to work on, and I want to do kind of a bunch more, and hopefully I'll have opportunity to kind of to chat with you all the more in the future.
Sounds good. So if you're not subscribed yet, go check it out. Community.inc, very simple. And follow Gareth on LinkedIn as well. Is always full of insights. So thanks everyone for joining today. Until next time, have a nice one. And Gareth, thanks again.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.